Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Ethereum, dubious speculation. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Let's go ahead and jump in. So, Ethereum has rallied back up to $3,000. So you can see that after Ethereum went home, ETHUSD has actually done incredibly well, right? All the way up from, 1,300 to 3,050 or so. We basically gave sort of a range of home being between like 1,200 to 1,500. Around the time it was hovering 1,500, 1,600, it had this one wick down to about 1,300. And then we did our Welcome Home Ethereum video. Now, one of the things that we said for Ethereum is that in order for ETH Bitcoin to bottom, right? In order for ETH Bitcoin to bottom, ETHUSD had to fall below this support level, right? This was a very similar thing that we've seen play out in prior cycles as well, right? Even if you look at the last cycle, once ETHUSD fell below this support level, right? It wasn't until after that then ETH Bitcoin finally bottomed. Now, what you'll notice is that during this drop right here, after ETHUSD finally lost support, ETHUSD had this drop, and then in early April, they had this wick all the way down here. Now look at ETH Bitcoin. You see that wick right there? That was in a little bit later on in April. But ETH Bitcoin did have a similar drop. Now, obviously, I can't know for sure if ETH Bitcoin has bottomed, right? Like, I can't say for sure if it has. I think if it goes lower, even if it's to a higher low, I think the main reason would be to escort alt Bitcoin pairs to their lows, right? I mean, and again, like, this is one of those things that, it could certainly get me into some trouble with certain people, because there's always a chance here that altcoins, get a rally back up for a little while before going lower to the range lows. There's even a chance that they could even go all the way back up here before coming back down. I mean, look at what happened in 2017. They rallied from the same level all the way back up to 0.5 and then went to the range lows before getting a big move back up. So I think the only reason that ETH Bitcoin could get a pullback at some point again this year would be during the pullback. Whatever pullback takes altcoins to their range lows, that could also correspond to a pullback by ETH Bitcoin. What I'm looking at right now, though, is ETH Bitcoin just had a weekly close above the bull market support band, which is certainly news, right? I mean, anytime it does that, I at least start to pay attention. Last year, I was not very optimistic about it holding as support, and the main reason was because I thought ETHUSD needed to go home, quantitative tightening was still going on, and interest rates had not yet been cut. This year, obviously, we have had some interest rate cuts. Quantitative tightening has slowed quite a bit. So I'm not as closed off to the idea, right? There's a chance that it holds as support. But if it does fall back in here, and even if it's into a higher low, I think it would mainly be due to accompanying all Bitcoin pairs lower. But what I'm looking at with ETHUSD here is, is it following what Tesla did last year, right? I mean, and you might say, well, that's kind of coming out of left field. But if you go back and watch the last few videos we've done, especially whenever we've talked about Ethereum, one of the main comparisons that I made was actually comparing it to Tesla, right? This drop into April. I mean, Tesla had this drop into April of 2024 right here, right? This drop into April of 2024. And then it rallied into mid-July, got a pullback, and then set new all-time highs by December, right? So, I mean, like, I am operating somewhat deterministically, and that could actually get me into trouble. I mean, Ethereum going home was a risky call. It paid off. Bitcoin dominance was a risky call. It paid off. I am operating under the assumption that Ethereum will eventually hit new all-time highs, which, maybe I'm wrong about that, right? I could be wrong about that. The thing that I think that's hard to figure out is the path there, right? Like, if it follows Tesla, then it would get a pullback into Q3 a little bit later on in Q3, and then not make new all-time highs until potentially December, right? Which, if it does that, it would actually correspond to what we've seen the last couple of years. And you might say, what are you talking about? Like, how could a high in like December correspond to the last couple of years? Well, look at alt Bitcoin pairs. You know, the main rallies by alt Bitcoin pairs the last couple of years actually occurred in October, November, right? Like October, November, December, right? That was when these larger rallies occurred. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have that now, but look at 2017. Like the bigger rally up here didn't really start going until late October, early to mid-November. So if Ethereum were to do that, then it could mean that all Bitcoin pairs, come up here, and then they get rejected at the range lows, and then they go up. And then maybe it's under that rally that sends Ethereum to potentially new all-time highs, right? The path is so hard, right? The path is so hard. And, a lot of people might say, well, the path isn't so important. But, I think if you're a person who's been DCAing altcoins for the last 3 to 4 years and realizing you should have just been buying Bitcoin, it makes a lot more sense why you talk about the path of alt Bitcoin pairs. With Ethereum going home, I can't, I don't want to fade ETH, right? I mean, it went home on its USD pair. And if you look at ETH Bitcoin market cap ratio, look what it did, right? I mean, it went back to where it went last cycle, right? So Ethereum went home on its USD pair, and you could also argue it went home on its Bitcoin valuation as well. And if you look at ETH dominance swept the low from the prior cycle, right? Like it swept this low right here from the prior cycle. So for Ethereum, it seems like a lot of this stuff played out how it made sense to, right? Like Ethereum USD went home. ETH Bitcoin dropped considerably, but technically speaking, ETH Bitcoin is still a higher low, right? It is still technically a higher low, and that's what I've always focused on at this point in the cycle, right? Like everyone always say, these are higher lows. And, for the last 3 years, I was more so focused on the lower highs because for me, I'm like, guys, look, Bitcoin dominance needs to go up. We're in this phase of the cycle. And everyone's like, well, you're ignoring the higher lows. I was never ignoring the higher lows. It was just the phase of the cycle to be bearish on ETH Bitcoin, right? That was the phase of the cycle. But it seems like a lot of that's played out for Ethereum, right? Like that was the missing puzzle piece for Ethereum to go home. But there's another puzzle piece now, right? And that's all Bitcoin pairs. Like, are they going to go home? I think they are, right? I think they are. It's just hard to know the exact path to which they get there, right? That's what's really hard to know. Do they just kind of stall out here like 2019 and go to the range lows just before QT potentially ends? Do they get a bigger bounce and then go to the range lows? I don't know, right? But the path of that obviously will have implications for ETH USD. Now, ETH USD on the daily time frame is still running into this, right? This sort of these higher highs. That's what it's still running into right now. So again, I'm not really able to make a lot of videos right now, so I'm just recording a couple and I'll release them. But that's what I'm watching, right? Like, can Ethereum break through here? And by the time I release this video, maybe it already has, right? I don't know. Can it break through there? That's the shorter term resistance, right? That's the that shorter time frame that I'm looking at. And remember, if you compare it to Tesla, it was around, it was around mid-July when Tesla got that pullback. Now, it wasn't a big pullback. Tesla just got this pullback starting the week of July 8th. If you look at it on the daily time frame, just to make these comparisons between Tesla and Ethereum, if you look at Tesla in 2024, it found a low in sort of like mid to late April, and then it rallied until about mid-July. And then it got a pullback to the bull market support band. Now, if you look at Ethereum, it already got a pullback to the bull market support band. So I don't even know if it needs to do that because, technically it already did it, right? But that doesn't mean it won't just rally and then go back to the bull market support band again, which is what Tesla kept doing until late October, right? That's what it kept doing until late October. So there's a chance that Ethereum does that same thing. Now, if it does that, I think the main reason would be to escort all Bitcoin pairs to the range lows if it shows that, if it shows that weakness. But I think that's sort of the shorter term resistance for Ethereum is to break through that. Ultimately, I hope it does. I've seen a lot of people be super bullish about Ethereum for a long time and to sort of finally give up. And now that they're giving up, I'm sort of waking up to the idea that maybe it could. But there's another thing as well, and that is this resistance level. And I've always known this was going to come into play. Like, this was something I thought about back in, well before Ethereum went home, right? I knew that whenever it broke down, right, it was then going to have to come back up to it and test this and see if it could get through. And I do think eventually it very well could, right? Like if you look at last cycle, it's always interesting because last cycle, if you measure that up to the high, that ended up marking the top. The problem is that this cycle has been a lot more, like the angle of attack is a lot lower. So the question is like, does it have to go back down and then go back up later on, where then maybe it puts a new all-time? I mean, if you look at the cycle before that, you can kind of see back then Ethereum was able to break through. So I don't want to sort of limit it by saying it has to get, it can't break that through that trend line. I mean, it certainly could, but I figured that it might provide some resistance at some point whenever it does hit that level. So I am certainly watching that. Obviously, sort of the elephant in the room is, will it actually go to the lower part of the regression band? Guys, like, anything's possible. I'm not gonna sit here and say it can't happen. If we get a really, really, really bad macro data point, it's possible, right? Like I can't lie to you and say that it's impossible for it to happen. What I would say is that when Ethereum went home, that was good enough for me, right? Like I don't want to, bet the family farm on that, the other idea that it has to go to lower regression band. What I will say is, in the absolute worst case scenario for 2025, right? Like absolute, like, and we're talking about like the next inflation print comes in at like 4.5% or something crazy, right? Or the unemployment rate in August or something shoots up to 4.5, 4.6%, right? In the absolute worst case scenario, there's always a chance that ETH could go back down here and sweep the low, right? In 2025, right? There's always a chance that happens, but you would have to have a pretty bad macro data point, I think, for that to actually play out. Okay. I certainly was, I would say before it was like more of a 50-50. Obviously, with things moving higher now, the probabilities start to diminish that something like that could happen. But if you want to know, I mean, people always want to say, like, they ask, like, what's worst case scenario? Like, if worst case scenario played out, I could see that. But even in that situation, it would probably just be like this, where it's like a wick and it just goes right back up. Okay. So for me, I'm not really looking for that as something that has to happen. Personally, I'm satisfied with Ethereum going home here and then just trying to ride this to new all-time highs. But in the back of my mind, like, I know there's probably going to be some weakness a little bit later on in Q3. And obviously, we've talked a little bit about that for a while. Like, there's going to be a pullback in Q3. And I always knew, like, I'm like, if there's not a pullback, like, the minute Q3 starts, I'm going to get a lot of flack for that. And I think it's somewhat justified. If you look at 2023, there was a pullback into Q3, but it didn't really happen until later on in Q3, like August, September. If you look at, like, 2017, there was also a pullback in the third quarter of the year, but it didn't really happen until a little bit later on. So at least for Bitcoin, anyways. So like I do think there's likely going to be a little bit of a pullback, like August, September timeframe, and that's going to be that window of weakness. Once we get past that, there's a good chance that Ethereum could just continue the rally. But I think that's the biggest thing right now for Ethereum is that, it's likely going to come up to some weakness a little bit later in Q3, and we need to get past that, I think, before you have a more realistic shot of setting new all-time highs. But again, like I could absolutely be wrong about Ethereum, Ethereum hitting new all-time highs. I might be wrong about that. Just because Ethereum went home doesn't mean that it can't go lower. It always could. I mean, there are certain things that like have always bothered me this cycle that eventually play out. Like Bitcoin dominance going to 60%. That played out. And then we changed it. I changed it to 66%. And then that happened, right? Ethereum going home. Felt like it was never going to happen. And then it did. All Bitcoin pairs are the current thing that feels like it's never going to happen, right? Like I deep down, I think it will happen. But the path to get there has been a painful one, For ETH USD, like, I don't feel as deterministic about it having to go to like the lower regression band in this year. But if it does happen, I will say this, guys. If it happens, I would not let it scare you. I think it would be a great opportunity. But for me, I wasn't willing to, sort of risk that may or may not happening. So for me, it was just welcome home Ethereum, right? Like that was good enough for me for this cycle. If it does go a little bit lower later on, it's got to be because of some really bad macro data print. What I would be looking for is hopefully any pullbacks that can hold on the bull market support band. If it gives that up, then obviously you start to call into question these other levels. But if it follows the Tesla blueprint, then after these major rallies, then you wouldn't really expect all-time highs until a little bit later on, until say Q4, which could line up, right? I mean, that a Q4, Q4 would more so line up with all Bitcoin pairs the last few years. So, okay, so I still have pretty, bad internet. So again, just to sort of summarize, what I'm looking at in the short term for Ethereum is for it to break back up here, because I think that is sort of the next step. If it can't break through here within the next couple of weeks, then you're likely going to have a pullback back to the bull market support band in August, September. Okay? If it can break through here and it starts shooting up 3,100, 3,200, 3,300, then I would just step out of the way because it's likely going to all-time highs. That would be what I would guess. Okay? In the short term, this is the weekly, right? This is the weekly. This is that weekly structure. 3,100 or so is a big level for Ethereum to break through right now, because it's basically getting back up to the level that it held as support for so long. Now, on the daily time frame, what you look at, I think, is this level, right? This higher high structure that has been in place for what seems like, or at least for a while, right? This higher high structure, that it's been going up against mid-May, and then late May, and then mid-June, and now again mid-July. This is that sort of that lower time frame structure that it needs to break through. So if it can break through that, it's probably breaking through on the higher weekly time frame too. If not, then you're likely just looking at further consolidation through September, and then perhaps a bigger attempt a little bit later on into Q4. So I do hope that Ethereum can make new all-time highs this cycle. I mean, I don't think a lot of people have given up on Ethereum, but technically speaking, again, and being technically correct is the best way to be correct, right? I mean, technically speaking, ETH Bitcoin is still at a higher low, right? It still is. I'll be honest with you guys, if ETH Bitcoin takes out that low, it would be really hard, to not just assume it's a relic, right? And I don't want to assume that. I'm just being honest with you guys, right? Like, I hope that low holds. This April 2025 low. The only thing that I wonder is, there was also a low around the same time last year. It got up above the bull market support band and then ultimately fell down. The reason why this might be slightly different is because last year at the same time there had not been any rate cuts, and quantitative tightening was even stronger back then. Now we've had some rate cuts. We're probably going to have some more rate cuts. So if there is another drop into August, September, there's a good chance that it might hold as support, considering that there's probably going to be a couple more rate cuts between now and then, or at least one, I would guess. And also, you might get an end to quantitative tightening. If that doesn't happen and ETH Bitcoin goes lower, then it's really hard. It would be really hard to look at this structure and think it looks good. For now, I still think it looks okay. But at that point, I think it'd be hard. And the reason is I think this is just the initial capitalization phase, and then it turns into an oscillator is ideal. If it turns into a bleeder and it puts in a lower low, then we'll talk about that if and when it happens. But that's not yet happening right now. ETH USD, this is the level, right? This is the level that we're coming up to right now. Can it really break through here? If it can, then it likely goes to new all-time highs. If it can't get through here, and the reason I'm giving you these paths, because I'm not gonna be able to make videos like for a few more days. Like I'm making a couple videos, one on Bitcoin, one on Ethereum. I'm gonna release them both, and I'll see you guys later this week. 4 or 5 days from now, probably. This is what you need to watch, I think, for ETH USD. If it's rejected here, it likely will just pull back for the rest of Q3. If it breaks through here, more likely going to all-time highs. I hope that Ethereum hits all-time highs this cycle, because if it doesn't, I think that'll be a bad omen for it. The main question is when. If I had to guess, I wouldn't think it would happen in Q3, but, you know, I still think it was worth accumulating a position when it went home, just in case it does, right? I mean, this was a great opportunity, in my opinion. The question is does it break through here? We'll see. If it doesn't, then we'll do sort of a damage report in a few weeks and see if we can still follow Tesla and kind of repeat that same pattern where it goes up later on in the year. If it break through here, then I think we just drop the Tesla comparison and say it's doing its own thing, right? We don't need to compare it to Tesla anymore. But those are my thoughts on Ethereum. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and again, check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.